So the FIA have just unveiled the new 2026 Formula One regulations, and, well, we're going to be telling you why, in our opinion, they are just not good enough. But there may be some optimism as well. Let's get into it. And welcome back to the Hot Lap. So we are talking the 2026 F1 regulations just announced today. So the FIA have revealed their changes to the 2026 regulations, and there are quite a few alterations heading, I think, mostly in the right direction, but kind of keeping too much the same is our opinion. And as we know, 2026 will see the first major changes to these regulations since not that long ago, 2022. Basically 2.5 years, and the sporting body have unveiled what some are considering some dramatic alterations which will change the face of F1, and we're going to go through everything that you would probably need to know about this using articles from like Planet F1, The Race, etc., and other articles, Road Relevance. We will be getting into it all, and ultimately, as I've already mentioned, I don't quite think, if I'm honest, that these regulations are good enough. I'm sorry. Why? I may hear you ask. Well, yeah, let's get into it. So the first change the FIA announced was one fans and drivers have been calling out for, and this is the significant one. One of the big ones I would love to talk about. The 2026 cars are going to be 30 kilograms lighter, which on face value is let's be fair, it's a good thing. I mean, as you can see here, they are smaller as well as 30 kilograms lighter on the current spec, and they're also 1 centimetre thinner and with a 2 centimetre smaller wheelbase. The FIA has described it as a nimble car. Remember that nimble car concept, and it should hopefully produce better racing. As for the weight, it says it says that will improve efficiency and handling. Absolutely, 30 kilograms lighter will have a better, smaller cars will make it more nimble. However, and the issue I've got is, because we have these hybrid units still, and we'll get into that, it's made Formula One cars naturally quite bigger and with their bigger fuel tanks. Now, I'm going to shock you here as the weight of Formula One cars throughout the year and the size of Formula One cars. Let's get, first of all, into the size comparison between the F1 cars. There we go. That's a realistic one between 2021 and 2008. Yeah, slightly smaller than 1 centimetre, isn't it? So the 2008 cars, this is obviously, the regulations changed again in 2009. Not bad. I mean, just take a look at it. A lot better, wouldn't you say? The cars have got so big, which is one of the reasons, not the only reason, that we have tracks like Monaco and maybe other tracks where it is now a lot harder to overtake. And back in 2008, we did have races where you can overtake, yet we did not need DRS. However, DRS is also going, which we'll get into. So I'm slightly disappointing, but on a plus note, they are heading in the right direction, which ultimately is a good thing. Now, if you want to have a look, if you want to have a look at the weight, yes, they use the word nimble, but so far this century, they're definitely not going to be the most nimble cars going. This is essentially the weight comparison, which I appreciate is going to shock you a tiny bit if you can see. So we've got from 2022, they were 790 kilograms. So they're losing 30 kilograms. So they're going back almost to 2021 spec weight, which is 752 kilograms. Okay, good, you may think. But in 1995 to 2008, yes, bearing in mind you didn't need there was refueling then, but they weighed 595 kilograms. Yeah. I mean, that's like people different, isn't it? In 2010, they went up to 620 kilograms, and ever since then, they've been going up. 2013, 642 to 690 in 2014, and that was when we had the first hybrid. So 2013 to 2014 was a fairly big step, but even in 2017 they went up to 728, maxing out in the 21 regs at 752 kilograms, and then in 2022 790 kilograms. I mean, just taking it on weight value, no pun intended, it's simply not good enough. These cars need to be more nimble. And there's a couple of other things. We've got DRS is out, which I think is a good thing. Electric boost in is in as new, which is a measure. And that's the most significant change a lot of people see coming with the announcement of DRS is no longer going to be used for overtaking. The FIA have said that DRS will be available to drivers throughout the race rather than just when a driver is a second behind one another. In its place, they have a new system and they call it manual override mode. Manual override. That's going to be available when and essentially, why don't they just call it push to pass like in America? They'll be available, and that grants more electric power development to help them overtake the car ahead. And it remains to be seen though how the FIA is going to utilise it from the outset. It sounds very similar, as Planet F1 are saying, to the, as I just mentioned, push to pass. Now let's look at the more efficient engines, shall we? So a big focus on the 2023 regulations is on the engine, with a desire to make them cheaper and more efficient. However, the FIA have said that it's sat down with Mercedes, Ferrari, Renault, Ford, Red Bull, Ford/Red Bull, remember Ford and Red Bull joining forces in 2026, and Audi in 2021 to begin to design the regulations, and the result is a power unit which is almost 300% more battery power than the current spec, which, okay, fair enough. We're going more down to the electric route, the electric hybrid route, but the FIA say there is also an even split between internal combustion engine and electric power. The cars will also run on 100% sustainable fuel. Right. So let's get into this. I mean, there's even an article on F1.com on how sustainable fuels can benefit the world and the future of Formula One. So the big question for me is, why don't we just go full down the sustainable fuels and have a V8 and a 2008? No, everyone says electric is the future. Electric is the future, and this is the big thing. Is it the future though? That's and therein lies one massive issue that I find with people suggesting electric is the future. Let me just share this article here with you in respect of the Daily Mail. Yeah, it is the Daily Mail, I know. But car makers and this is from February of this year. Car makers from Mercedes-Benz to Ford are delaying or scrapping further electric vehicles as demand slows in Britain and abroad. They're grappling with weaker demand for EVs than expected with buyers put off by fears over insufficient charging infrastructure, expensive price tags. So, I mean, for example, Mercedes-Benz have delayed its electrification goal last week, while Ford said it's rethinking its EV strategies, and Volkswagen delayed launching a forthcoming EV. And in recent months, Audi and General Motors have also reviewed their EV rollouts, and purchase of new electric cars fell by 25% in January. Yes, I know we're not talking about this is not exactly Formula E. I know this is, but they're talking road relevance. And yes, when you look at hybrid, yeah, it is not fully electric. I completely agree. And sustainability, quite rightly, is very important to Formula One. But why then are they not looking what many people feel is the future? Because we've got e-fuels and sustainable fuels. They offer essentially a carbon neutral alternative to fossil fuels. Where they differ is in whether e-fuels and sustainable fuels, I'm not going to give some massive lecture, but they differ in the process used to create fuel. One is based on plants, whether the other is based on energy. Sustainable fuels, otherwise known as biofuels, which Formula One will be using, they harness the energy potential of plants, essentially vegan Formula One cars, potentially down the road. Now, during the photosynthetic process, plants condense and absorb the atmosphere CO2 to grow. We learnt this in science. Now, because of this, burning plants and biomass is going to be a sustainable process of releasing the absorbed CO2, resulting in carbon neutral biofuels, which is surely a good thing. And both e-fuels and e-fuels are produced via the binding of hydrogen from water and CO2 from the atmosphere by using what they class as a high pressure catalyst energy. Loads of science. Essentially, e-fuels are considered a nearly net neutral alternative to those fossil fuels, as it recycles CO2 in the atmosphere, which is released when combust. The nearly neutral part comes from the fact that the e-fuel production is extremely power hungry, and as a solution, production plants use renewable energy sources to maintain a sustainable process. So still a learning, and both these sustainable fuels are an alternative to fossil fuels without losing much in terms of energy and density. At the moment, they're in their infancy, fair enough, but why hasn't Formula One then decided to use that? They've gone down the really expensive hybrid route because that's what manufacturers want. Yes, you have Honda there. Yeah, you didn't get Porsche though, did you? But then you've got Audi there that want them. And it seems a lot of people, they don't want to go the full electric route. Hybrid potentially is the way to go, but it is. I can't deny how expensive the hybrid technology is. It's ruined some British touring car championship teams, and the WRC were considering at one point of dumping it completely because it's too expensive for the manufacturers. Sustainable fuel maybe will allow you to have the slightly cheaper, more entertaining internal combustion engines, which surely is going to be a good thing. Now, F1 have even suggested themselves that they may get rid of the hybrid technology, and they may well have sustainable fuels. But in 2030, F1 could scrap the hybrid. And that's from Stefano Domenicali. So May the 15th, Formula One could wave goodbye to the controversial hybrid engine era from 2030. Domenicali is expecting a closer battle on the track at Imola this weekend, but also heavy. For instance, the issue of Red Bull owning two teams has emerged, yada yada. He added, we confirm the maximum limit of 25 Grand Prix. And also, from my perspective, and talking about the engines, here we go. The score point is the weight of the single seaters, and that's the problem. And also, from my perspective, I would like the engines to produce a nicer, louder sound, as the enthusiasts are asking for. If sustainable fuels leads us to zero emissions, we know they already do. Then we can think about abandoning the power units for 2030. So you are essentially, the FIA, spending all of that money to get rid of another new rule set in 2030. Why? And why I don't like all these new rule sets, which I'll get into towards the end, because let's carry on. So the active aerodynamics, this does sound fairly exciting, and I think this is a positive that we can take. So while in previous generations the rear wing was the only movable part, DRS, but now both the rear and front wing can be altered during a race and during zones like those used currently for DRS. That's the drag reduction system. The rear wing flap opens on a straight if you're a second behind, and you gain a fair lick of speed. So the active area will make for closer racing to the FIA in areas such as achieving very low drag on the straights. Drag is essentially stuff that makes your car go slower. If you've ever wound the window down as a kid in a car and you put your hand up, you can feel the wind resistance, can't you? A really, really basic example of drag. But if you start doing that, you get less drag. It's kind of more aerodynamic. That's essentially a really loose example of what they're talking about drag, and this will in turn help the energy management requirements of the new power units with the drag. There was a suggestion that you're going to lose hybrid boost halfway down a straight at Monza, for example, and have to almost coast the car. But the FIA said that the 26 cars will be switchable between these two configurations to either minimise fuel consumption or maximise that cornering performance. They've had also, very importantly, more safety. The chassis are going to be made better to protect the drivers. For example, they've revised the front impact rules, introducing a two-stage nose design. What do you mean by that? Well, imagine where you've had crashes where the car hits a barrier, slides, and then hits another barrier. So when the car hits the barrier the first time, the chassis, so to speak, is somewhat weakened. And then if it's still going at a fair lick, I mean, say, it's gone from like 200 to 100, but then it's still going. Yeah, you want to still be protected for that second hit. Side intrusion rules are also more stringent, while protection around the driver and fuel cell have been improved, particularly the fuel cell. If you remember Roman Grosjean's accident in Bahrain a few years ago, jumping out of the very fire. So it's not all bad. It's not all bad. I mean, when you look at the Mohammed bin Salem has said today the FIA is defining a hugely exciting future for the pinnacle of motorsport with the launch of a comprehensive new set of regulations. Following the publication of the 2026 power unit regulations 2 years ago, we've taken the opportunity to redefine the chassis regulations to match yada yada. Okay, thanks, Ben. Yeah. Well done. The power unit regulations have already resulted in a record number of power unit manufacturers committing to the sport, Well, you say that. The only new one is really Ford via Red Bull and Audi. You can't really class Honda because they keep coming and going. I mean, they change their partners more than, they kind of change their mind more quicker than Katie Price changing their partners, for example. F1 reference, Jordan. But yeah, so the power unit regulations have already resulted in a number of PU manufacturers committing to the sport, and now in tandem with chassis regulations that provide lighter, more agile cars. But that is, I mean, let's be fair, I do think the lighter and more agile cars need to absolutely be in air quotes. Now, the key features of the F1 regulations are advanced sustainability, technology and safety, are aimed together with Formula One cars was to produce a car that was right for the future of the sport's elite category. We believe we have achieved that goal, although I mean, the hybrid batteries, do they create more pollution? That's the other thing, because we know there's massive controversial about so it's difficult. I mean, there's an article here saying when tested with an empty battery, the BMW, Peugeot and Renault emitted 5 to 7 times their claimed CO2 on the road. Are hybrid batteries worse for the environment? Well, the materials they use to make car batteries, such as nickel and lithium, can be harmful to the environment, however, when improperly handled. But that's the kicker. When these batteries are taken care of properly, they won't have near the negative impact they otherwise should. They're better, I think, than the fully electric ones. And the other issue that I've got with FIA teasing the fact that they're going to be changing the rules again in 2030 is the 2026 cars. They are going to look different. We are moving away from the supersized cars, but this is another brand new set of rules for 2026, which you could say maybe F1 needed. But the enthusiasm, if you've been a long-term F1 fan, the enthusiasm for these changes have somewhat waned throughout the years. They always promise to shake up the pecking order, and more often than not, as is the case of 1998, when they went to the groove tyres and McLaren dominated that season. It was I just think Ferrari's technical brilliance with Ross Brawn against Adrian Newey and Michael Schumacher's brilliance that actually gave us a title one, and McLaren throwing the ball a bit because of the Mercedes unreliability. If you remember, and then 2009, where Brawn kind of dominated initially, but then Red Bull essentially caught them up. And then I wouldn't say Red Bull dominated as much as Mercedes and Red Bull did in the 22-23 era. But, for example, 2013 they did. But yeah, when you still had very much one team dominating that era from 2014. And obviously, that was Red Bull from 2010 to 2013 doing that domination. 2014, it was all about Mercedes until 2021, but then there was a regulation change in 2021 that hurt Mercedes with the low-rate cars, but we did get a fantastic season up until that last 5 minutes. And then you got 2022, where, once again, Red Bull absolutely dominated. And the problem is that this whole novelty factor of new rules, shiny, it's almost like a shiny toy, but it doesn't seem to last that long. Sure, you've got what I think is a fascinating pre-season when testing is actually worth watching every minute. If you remember how excited we were in the 2022 testing and the bouncing, who's going to sort it out? When we first saw the no-pod Mercedes, that was amazing too. But the anticipation lasts all the way until that first qualifying session of the first race, where normally it looks very, very different, doesn't it? And everyone then gets kind of depressed. So, yeah, and then it becomes a waiting time for fans, and then all the teams catch up, and then we have new regulations again. And at the moment, it would appear potentially 2025 and maybe this year we're in for a bit more of a fight than we were in 22 and 23. I say maybe. It makes it quite exciting. And the problem is for F1 that even if it's 2026 rules are a success, something probably we're not really going to know until 2027, 2028. They're going to be ripped up and redone again for 2030. That doesn't mean we shouldn't have new rule resets. It's just that F1 has always been about innovation, and making a stable set of regulations would go against the championship's DNA. However, wouldn't it be best now in with the cost cap to, if you're going to change, you change a bit each year to perfect the rules rather than completely having a change? But I mean, even the race is saying they could be used, these rule changes, more sparingly, or will simply be locked in with this cycle of throwing away something good every few years in search for something better. It's almost like we're looking we're looking for the holy grail each time and it's not getting it. And also the focus on the engine. This is from the race now. The rules package looks interesting. The engine regs are a commercial necessity with the hybrids. I do understand, even though I think it's wrong, and the compromises made are coherent and logical, but it doesn't necessarily add to the best package to produce the kind of F1 spectacle and challenge everyone desires. The need for hybrid power units works against the lightweight ethos, let's say. That's something we've been saying as well. And while the FIA has done a laudable job to squeeze the weight and size downwards, they are backed in elements it had to work within. That means it's only chipping away at the problem. So it's not great, if I'm honest. It's a very underwhelming, I think, set of regulations that potentially doesn't really solve a problem, I don't think. And I'd much rather than change the regulations a tiny bit year on year to almost perfect them, because now we seem to be getting finally a close championship. So, I mean, I think it might be good for things like Mercedes, maybe, because, you know, another change of regulations means they might not be struggling as much. So I guess that's a good thing. And everyone's suggesting, and this is the thing about changing regulations and teams dominating, that the new Mercedes power unit looks to be the best. So when 2026 hits, are they going to win by a country mile? And then we have the same problem we have with Red Bull, the same problem we have with Mercedes again. Yeah. And that's the kicker thing. All these manufacturers can be really interested in watching F1. But as we know, for example, with the Max Verstappen domination, F1 went absolutely, the viewing figures were in decline. The only reason F1 was making more money year on year was they introduced more sprint races, which more people watch the sprint races, because let's be fair, I do agree with Martin Brundle, who wants to watch a practice session. Absolutely. But that's what's so kind of disappointing, because new regulations, people dominating, no one watches, and ultimately Formula One, yeah, it's not going to go away anytime soon. It is the pinnacle of motorsport, but it relies on people's eyes on the TV. And if there's better things and more exciting things to watch, then naturally they are maybe going to watch that. Or we get seasons like 2021, which, you know, along with Drive to Survive, maximise even like the casual viewer, and everyone gets excited about F1. So fingers crossed, I guess. Anyway, if you let us know what you think about the new regulations. The biggest shocker is the weight, and the weight between these cars and the cars, for example, that, you know, even in Lewis Hamilton's era and Fernando Alonso that were winning in 2007, 2008. Let us know. Stay tuned for more F1 content, where we'll be talking Montreal. It's the Montreal Grand Prix practices tomorrow at the time of recording. We'll speak to you soon. Thank you very much.